It does feel quite risky, having 30 odd people and want to get paid. You get over that after the first month. It's like, oh, thank God stuff came in. And we're now like 13 years later, and we basically paid ourselves the minimum that we could live on. At a point in time where I was getting paid less than Marty because his mortgage was more, and I didn't care. I just wanted this to get off the ground. When we were at $1.8 million of revenue, for example, our profit margin was way better than any other time, all the way to 3 and past. We had to hire people in different positions to build our capacity to reach that next profitability sweet spot.
Welcome to the Level Me podcast, where we rise to the level of those around us. And today we have Mr. Mike Mortlock from MCG Quantity Surveyors. Mike, welcome.
Thank you. I hope we don't sink to my level today.
Hey man, you're on a pretty good level. What are you talking about?
Well, thank you kindly. We'll see what we can do. You've had some pretty big deals on this show, so.
Who, my dad?
Well, yeah. It's not as cool if you say that. It's like, oh, how did he get that guy?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just like.
Everyone's like, how did you line up the guy from Fantastic Furniture? Now I'm trying to think of an elaborate story. So, quantity surveying, what does that include?
Yeah, I know. Well, it includes like every barbecue I go to, a ruined conversation, because people say like, what do you do? Quantity surveying, I haven't heard of that. I'm like, oh gosh. Well, if I want to sound cool, I say construction cost economist.
Nice.
But that doesn't even sound that cool. I mean, we're the best people in Australia to say how much something costs to build. I mean, that's the skill set, right? But quantity surveying is a very broad spectrum. So there are quantity surveyors that just do contract reviews, or they do contracts admin for whatever projects. They might just do feasibility or insurance work. So there's quite a lot. I mean, I happen to specialise in the tax stuff. So quantity surveying is not cool, and then I've niched into the least probably cool part of quantity surveying. Here I am. I have fun.
No, it's good. Well, I think the biggest thing we know each other from is the buyer's agency space, and obviously you're elaborate in that space because you do, the deductions for tax return time, essentially. What's it called? What's the actual thing called?
A tax depreciation schedule.
That's what I'm thinking.
That's the only reason I'm popular, because essentially I give people money for free.
Back at tax time. But in my past life, I was an estimator for a residential construction building, and we've had this conversation in the past, but you guys do takeoffs for buildings and do the calculations and everything else like that.
Yeah.
So where did everything start? Like, did you start the business out of, okay, well, we want to do depreciation schedules for properties, or we estimate properties and we want to do takeoffs for that? Like, how did it all begin?
It really literally started with my business partner and I both managed different departments of a quantity surveying firm, and the side of the business, the traditional estimating stuff, the non-tax, they sort of stopped doing that service, and they kept him on because I think he was too expensive to make redundant. So he was bored, and I sort of got to the point where the founders of the business had all disappeared, and the people in front of me, like, I'm not a career sort of entrepreneur. I would have been a happy employee, I think. I just didn't have that natural, like, I'm going to go out and do stuff. I'm quite risk adverse. But I just got to the point where I felt very uninspired and bored, to the point where I enrolled in a Masters of Property just so I had something to do, something to challenge me, some new interest. And then, we just sort of got talking, like, how about we have a crack and do this ourselves? Because there was a number of areas where we kind of thought, this doesn't align with how we feel and the service that we think should happen. So we were arrogant enough to think we could do it better ourselves, and still trying to figure out if it's working.
Were you guys working together at a different quantity surveying company, or?
Same quantity surveying company,
right, okay. And you met each other there?
Yeah, and so then we both sort of buzzed off and got some contract work while we were kind of building things behind the scenes. So we worked for an Italian rail signalling company, which is even more niche than quantity surveying. And so he was a project manager, I was a project controller. We had sort of different roles within that business, and I became the first employee. So I remember meeting with our accountant, and they were like, once you do like 10 grand a month, then you can go out and you can get paid a pittance salary, and then it's your job to build that and bring your mate out. So, I jumped in, started building the revenue. And then, I think it took me maybe 8 or 10 months before I was comfortable to jump in. Again, pretty risk adverse. And then about another year before he jumped in, because he actually sort of kind of went up a couple of levels in that business, and he was on a pretty good wicket. So it's almost like I had to convince him to get into his own business,
So was he like above you at the previous company? Like, was he in a higher role or something?
No, it was a similar sort of thing. I suppose he was probably on a higher hourly rate.
Okay.
But there wasn't really, it wasn't like I was reporting to him or anything.
And so when you jumped into the business, did you go like 50-50 or?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I was the tax guy. He was the traditional estimating guy. And I'm a pretty bad estimator at some of the stuff that he's very good at. He does expert witness. I don't feel qualified to do expert witness court stuff because whilst I do know nuts and bolts construction estimating, I've specialised in that tax side for so long, and he doesn't do depreciation schedule. So it is kind of weird doing the same degree and being quantity surveyors but not being able to do what each other does.
So different. Is that kind of the primary two branches of a quantity surveyor?
Well, it's the way that we've kind of looked at it. There's tax and then everything else, right? Yeah. So there are some quantity surveyors that only do tax depreciation. There are other quantity surveyors, in fact, most of them, that don't do any tax depreciation, because really tax depreciation only sort of started to come out in 1997. So people might know, if they have no social life, the Income Tax Assessment Act of 1997. That's where we get the Division 40 and the Division 43s for the different components, right? So before that, estimating goes back to the pyramids. I think they had a clerk of royal works or something like that. So it's a very, very old profession.
Do you then both have responsibility? Like, obviously you're both responsible for each section of the business.
Yeah.
But as like a business, do you sit down together and go like, well, where's the most revenue coming through? Do you both have individual targets? Like, how does that whole?
Yeah. Well, that's sort of evolved over time. In the beginning, it was kind of like we just did everything because it was him and I, and then that was it. So, I would take the inquiry, then I might go and do like a week in Sydney inspecting, and then I'd come back and do the reports. And, depending on what he had on, like he might have his head in a expert witness thing. So we did a couple of those early on, and they're great because they're very expensive reports. Anything in the legal system is expensive. And then sort of since then, of course, we analyse and we go, well, where is the most profitable areas of the business? Where do we see more opportunity? And that happens now. There's a few different services that we're either relaunching or we're starting. So that's a constant thing we look at.
Yeah, reinventing the business.
Yeah.
So it took 10 months to jump out and go full time. So did you just have that one client the whole time, or did you have a few different clients that you started?
So in the job that I worked at, I was contracting as part of one business.
Okay.
But then when we started, it was basically, we brought on a couple of referrers where we were getting a little bit of regular work. And then that was kind of enough to go, I think we can make this happen. Like if I had full time to go out and meet people and sell whatever it is we do, then
you could make it work.
Yeah.
And did you have like a locked-in contract with some of these other businesses?
No. And that's not really a thing that happens in our industry. It happens in the financier space. So, for example, if you want to do, let's say, 6 townhouses, the bank doesn't go, look, here's $5 million, good luck. They say, well, how much money have you got? Put that in first, and then we're going to get these experts to assess the works fixed aside as it goes along. So they don't want to over-release the funds. They just want to pay what's been done. And so that really happens throughout the life cycle of that development. But even then, that could change. The financier could get somebody else in. There's a cost to that, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. But there's no real contracts.
Did you have a consistent source of revenue coming in though, like a certain number that you were hitting every month?
Fairly consistent,
Made you feel comfortable enough to jump out.
Yeah, but there's no guarantee. Even today, like we turn the lights on and we're like, I hope stuff comes in. You know, like it's a very different business. I mean, I've always kind of said the closer we can get to a subscription underpants business, the better. I don't know why I picked underpants because there's a lot of subscription businesses, but I guess I'm just immature. But there are certain services that we have that we do see there being a subscription sort of part to it. Let's say, for example, with insurance reports that we do, let's say someone wants to know how much it would cost to insure their property if it was to be damaged. I mean, that's something that needs to be updated regularly. So we might not necessarily have a contract to say, well, this is your subscription, but we might say, okay, well, we're going to do desktop reviews for 2 years, and then every 3 years we'll go back to side if anything's changed and do the report based on that. So that's the sort of stuff that I like, because it does feel quite risky, you know, having, you know, 30 odd people that have a very strong belief and want to get paid, but there's no guarantee that work actually exists, right? But you know, you get over that. Like after the first month, it's like, oh, thank God stuff came in. And we're now like 13 years later, and I still think about it, but I don't worry so much.
You got confidence that it is going to come through.
Yeah.
And how long did it take Marty to step out?
He was a year after me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, after you. So you were 10 months and then another 12 months after that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was that because you hit a certain revenue number consistently, or what was the decision?
Well, yeah, pretty much we got to the point where he was close to having his sort of full salary paid, and then him in the business was a valuable asset that would grow as well. And I think he was having fun with the work that he was doing. He was getting pay rises and stuff. And there was quite a few projects that, you know, in the rail industry, it has quite a life cycle, and then it gets to the point of commissioning where they test it and they deliver it. And he had quite a few that were sort of finishing up. And he also had his second child at that time as well. So I think there's just a few things that he wanted to clear before he jumped in.
Yeah, had it all lined up.
Yeah.
So once he stepped out, I'm guessing you would have had not consistent clients, but consistent revenue coming in. Was there ever points or times in the business where you felt like it would fail, or
always,
or have a hiccup in a couple of months or something?
I mean, when we started the business, I think in grand total we put $7,000 in each.
Wow!
And one of that tranche was to buy Marty a computer and estimating software. So that was a huge deal. The rest of it was websites and business cards and minimal stuff. And my first goal, and this is inspirational stuff, folks, my first goal was, geez, just get that $7,000 back. Like, it can be a failure, but I don't want it to be a failure that I've like, oh, this business failed, oh, and he lost money. You know, like $7,000 is not a huge amount of money. But back then I was like, I want that back. Right? That's goal one. It was modest, you know.
Get your investment back.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
And so we have very different business models. Obviously, being quantity surveyor, like you've done 3 of our properties, and every time there's an individual who comes out, they inspect the property, they go back, write up the report. Like, it's a very hands-on job, right?
Yeah.
Being in tech and online and social and everything else like that, it's a very sort of do it once, being able to do it multiple times. So for us to do a hire, you know, we got to be very considerate around what we need, like what point in the business are we in, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But coming from a model where like you actually need a resource to do it, obviously you can't go out to every single job every single day and deliver and do the reports. Was there a point in time after or even before Marty came on board where you did your first hire?
Well, our first hire, and I hope no one from the ATO is listening, but she was my old assistant back in my old job, or at least somebody that I trained and sort of worked underneath me for a while. And she actually got quite sick and had to leave a job. She was working in property management for a while and wasn't really ready to work full time. But I sort of said, you know, what's going on with you? Do you want to come and get a few hours? So we were paying her in Coles vouchers for a period of time, because we didn't have anything really set up. We didn't have an employee system. We didn't have employment contracts, and we just kind of needed her ad hoc. So that was just a private agreement. She became our first proper employee, and we did employ her with a proper contract, and she remains with us today, which is wonderful.
Oh, wow. I was going to ask if it was good or bad, but it seems to be quite good.
No, great. Yeah, she's still an important part of the team.
Has that for you, like, I mean, sometimes you hear some horror stories out there about people hiring family or friends for their first hire, and it's kind of you're doing it as a mateship sort of thing. And obviously it wasn't like a family member or a friend, but it was someone that you had worked with in the past. Did you know, based on your previous experience working with her, that what her quality of work would be like? And everything else like that?
Yeah, she's the sort of person you could set your watch to. I mean, the big consideration was as we grew, there were some times where she would kind of speak to me in a way where I'm like, oh, I don't want to set that as a precedent for the rest of the office. I would say something like, oh, what do you reckon? Like, do you reckon you can do this afternoon? She's like, oh, piss off, I'm busy. I'm like, oh, yeah, that was okay before. But now that there's other people listening, you can't really tell your boss to piss off. They're just little things like that.
When we were paying you in Coles vouchers,
that was fine.
Not anymore.
Yeah, and I was telling her to piss off, so everyone was happy.
She's obviously grown with the business, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so what does the hiring process look like now? Have you got how many people do you hire? Do you have a lot of churn? Like, how has that whole growth of the business been?
Yeah, well, I suppose if I think about it from the beginning, it was kind of like, all right, well, I can only be in one place at one time. So what happened when she was in the business is that I was out doing some inspections and I would take the inquiries and she would answer client things, or she would prep reports ready for me to come back and finish them. And then very, very quickly we realised that this is an efficiency game and we need to consider highest and best use. It's like a valuation term, but I think it works with people as well. So there were certain things that I could do that she couldn't do, and there were certain things that I did a lot of that she could do. So that was our first step. Anything that she could do, I shouldn't be doing, unless I could do it tremendously better or there was a real financial reason for that. So then that sort of philosophy lives in the business today, where it's like, okay, well, there's no hierarchy in terms of like, oh, you're in this position so you get the better chair. I've worked at places where like chairs were the status thing, right? Like you get the cheap chair, but I got the business chair, But there are different hourly rates, right? People do get paid higher or lower in the business depending on what they do. So we always kind of think, all right, well, if your hourly rate is higher, it's presumably because you're able to add value that someone lower down can't. So every time you're not working in that space, there's an injustice there. You could go so far as to say, well, you're stealing from the business because you're not giving to your maximum potential. And that goes all the way down to the most junior person. If they're doing a task that's repetitive, that there's a tech solution for, then it's incumbent on them to say, look, I actually think there's another way we can do this. So we have 4 values in the business. One is innovation. And, I've said a million times, like innovation just doesn't come from the people that you think are the most important or the cleverest, like the directors or the managers. It comes from everybody, because there are certain jobs that only recently have just been sort of created within our business. So there's only one person that's ever done it. You can't have an expectation of a manager to drive efficiency in that area if they don't even know what goes on there. So that's really important. So that was kind of the philosophy, is to stick everyone where they were adding their best value. And from a hiring policy, I mean, that HR is probably an area that we've gotten wrong so many times before. I'd get to the point where I was too busy and I didn't really want to be in the interviews, and I think we had the wrong people. I think the culture got off track. It only takes 1 or 2 people then to suddenly have a real big HR problem. These days, people really have to align with our values. So innovation is one, but drive, accountability, teamwork. These are the key things. And you hear, like special forces guys talk about, like, we don't want the best person in terms of how many targets that they hit or how fast they can run or push-ups. We want the person that gels the most with the team. Of course, the performance is important, but if you can't gel with the team and you're the highest performer, there's no place for you. So that's kind of a guiding framework rather than a hard and fast, this is exactly the type of person that we look for.
Okay, that makes sense. How do you measure or maintain that, like those 4 qualities that you stand for? Like, how do you go, is this person innovating at the best of their ability that they can?
Well, that sort of speaks to their performance catch-ups. Okay. So they have a requirement, certainly when they have their annual reviews, give us 2 examples where you showcased drive,
Okay.
or a couple of areas where you felt that your drive was left lacking. And we expect answers to those things because we can all come up with examples. Like, we're human beings, we're not robots. Like, I like to think perfection is robot level, and we should always sort of strive for that as much as we can. But human beings have bad days, they make mistakes, they're not efficient, they get distracted. So there should always be answers to that, and that's how we kind of keep everyone back to that.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. One thing that I love about you is you maintain this front in the space that you're in, like in our space in the property sector. Like, you still do catch-ups with people, you still maintain that face-to-face value, you're still doing lives in groups and all that sort of stuff. And I know there's been times in your business where, like, I've had other people take me out for lunch and other people take me out for dinner. Yep. And even though I'm always grateful that, you know, I get to go out with them and meet with them, one thing that I struggle with, or that I have gone through, is like, it would be really easy just to hire someone to go out and be the face of the business, or go out and, you know, maintain the relationships and everything else like that.
Yeah.
But I think you do it really well, and you kind of maintain that role really well. How have you, over the course, like with those other hires where you've had other people maintain relationships and all that sort of stuff, what have you learned about that whole thing? Is maintaining the relationship something that only the founder can do, or do you feel like it can be handed over?
I think there's definite power in the founder being at the forefront of that. It sort of depends what your role is. Like, because in our business, I'm quite a front man, right? But then there are other businesses, like if you think about the property couch guys, right? I don't know how many directors that there are, but I've looked at their website before, and I think there's like 6 of them. But who do you know? Bryce and Ben, because they're the podcast people. So if you are that front person, like, there's kind of an expectation that if someone wants you to go and present to their office, that it's you, right? So it's a tricky one. It's a double-edged sword. And if you hand relationships over to someone else, you can get people feeling like, oh, well, I'm not important anymore. Like, Mike thinks he's a big deal, so he's like, you know, let's send one of the plebs to go and take Jordan out for lunch or something. But, you know, it's just you can only be so many places at one time. So what I sort of choose to do now is less of the meeting new people and more of the maintaining the relationships that I've got. You know, sometimes if it's a big organisation, I'll come in because I see there's a huge commercial value. Sometimes there'll be business development people that we have, and they're like, oh, it'd be great if I could bring you along. They just sort of roll me out as like some weird kind of just shiny thing, which is great, you know. And I feel that's kind of part of my job and why I do so much media and podcasting and stuff, because I kind of think my job is to sort of half kick the door in for our business development people. You know, there's a big difference when you're trying to sell a product between, I've never heard of you guys, and that's that guy with like the cheap haircut and the glasses and the dodgy, patchy red beard.
Bags himself out.
Yeah.
So with the new guys, maybe like guys that are starting out but still want to build those relationships with, is that where you would send a BDM to go and build those relationships?
Well, yeah, I guess it depends. I mean, if it's a relationship that you've already established, you want to try and keep hold of that wherever you can. And I suppose, like, I don't do everything just with a financial viewpoint. Like, there are relationships that I maintain with people that don't really have a set commercial value based on themselves, but they might be connected to other people that do, or they might just provide so much other non-financial value to me in terms of industry insights or knowledge. Like, for example, there's a buyer's agent that I catch up semi-regularly with, never sent me a job, and I know they send their jobs to a competitor because that relationship started before I even started a business, and they're a terrifically loyal person, which is a wonderful virtue. And I would not have had the benefit of their friendship and their knowledge if I'd gone, well, like, if you're not using me, then like we're not going out, you know?
Yeah. Then I was going to say there's value in it, but is there something in the back of your head that goes, I'm going to maintain this relationship so maybe one day they will bring business that way?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's come into the back of my mind a number of times, of different sort of things, you know. So I think it's the wrong approach to bash people over the head and go, why are you working with them? Like, they're rubbish. But if you just sort of say, look, you know, I'm sure they're doing a good job for you. If anything changes, you know where I am. Yeah, I'm not a salesperson. I just I think my strategy is to just focus on being the best at what I can do. And ideally, if people get into a situation where they're like, I don't feel like I'm getting a level of service, or, I listen to what Mike's talking about and they're not doing that. So that's the sort of sales that I like. It's the attraction sort of stuff.
Yeah, I like that. What have you and Marty done in terms of like reinvesting back into the business? Because one, not mistake that I've made, but one thing that I've done is like just tried to pay myself first, replace my income, and then build and grow that income. Beyond the point where it would have been reasonable for me to go, well, this is enough to pay someone else an entire salary.
Yeah.
Let's reinvest back into the business and continue growing it that way.
Yeah.
I also don't do a lot in terms of like marketing, ad spend, or any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
How have you guys kind of approached that whole area?
It's different for different businesses, right? But we basically paid ourselves the minimum that we could live on. And there was actually a point in time where I was getting paid less than Marty because his mortgage was more, and I didn't care. I just wanted this to get off the ground, and I just thought, like, that's a paltry sum of money if we can get to where we think that we might be able to get to. And we talk a lot about profitability sweet spots. So when we were at $1.8 million of revenue, for example, our profit margin was way better than any other time, all the way to 3 and past, right? Because we had to hire people in different positions to build our capacity to reach that next profitability sweet spot, right? So sometimes you kind of have to make that decision, like, is this enough and is this working, or do we think that there's greener pastures? But often you have to invest in that, right? That might be trying to launch a new service that takes some time to get off the ground, so you have to hire some technical people for that, and they're just an overhead for a while, and then they get to the point where they break even, and then it kind of makes sense, and then again you go, oh, there's another opportunity. It's like, oh, do we want to go through that like terrible net profit margin wilderness again to get to the next step? And when I started the business, I was still in my late 20s, so ego metrics were a thing. It's like, I want 50 staff or 100 staff or $10 million business or whatever. It was mostly staff that was sort of the number in our heads. Now I'm like, how can we do what we're doing with less staff? We're not trying to get rid of them, but let's just not hire more if we don't need to. And that's where we've worked a lot in the efficiency stuff. But we're probably at the point now where we are approaching our next profitability sweet spot, and we've got some plans to try and stay in and around that area. And bigger's not better. And I think one of the most powerful things that you can have in life is enough. And figuring out what your enough means is like a superpower, right? Because, you see so many people out there, and you can never win the game of like who's got the shiniest thing or the fastest car or the biggest house. Like, because then you just compare yourself to the next person, all the way to the point where you're like, oh, like Jeff Bezos made 34 billion this year. I'm like, I only did 12. Like, that's so sad. It just never ends.
There's always someone else with a bigger boat. Hey,
yeah.
When did that ego kick out? Like, obviously in your 20s, I don't know if you're, where you were in your life and how that kind of looked, but
it was about 2:30. It's a work in progress, really. Like, because there's still a part of that kind of ties my value as a human being in my accomplishments, right? Because if I take away the fact that I'm on podcasts or on the telly or on a blog, or I'm the boss of an organisation, you take all that sort of stuff away, and you realise that you're just a middle-aged fat white bloke. That's a hard thing to sit with, But I think it's important to understand that, well, like, none of this really means anything. It's more about the connections that you have with the people that matter. And I've made mistakes with focusing too much on the work and not on the friendships and the relationships and that sort of stuff. So honestly, it's still a work in progress for me.
So what would you say has replaced the ego? Is it just maintaining those relationships and going through life in a different light?
I think it's probably like just a natural evolution for people as they grow up, I suppose. Like, not everyone feels that way. I mean, you look at someone like Elon Musk, right? Like, he could have stopped and disappeared a million different times. I mean, there's an old YouTube video of him getting a McLaren P1 in his late 20s, and he had no hair. He was bald at that point in time, which is another curious little side thing. So there's been some stem cell stuff or something going on. But, you know, he's doing what he's doing because he's got this grandiose vision. You know, he wants to repopulate planet Earth onto Mars to ensure the survival of our species. So I mean, what a mission, right? So that kind of drives him. It wasn't about money like decades ago, right? So I guess everyone just sort of has to come up with their own idea about, well, what motivates them and what's really, really important. And we get distracted by the next shiny thing, you know, the newest kind of toy. And you look at social media, that's what it's all about. Like when I first got Instagram, one of my first pictures was a pair of old Tommy Hilfiger shoes, which I bought cheap at a factory outlet. I think I bought like 4 of them because they were like $20 each. And I'd just broken a pair in nicely. I didn't want to throw them out, so I duct taped them. And I took a photo, and it was like #winning or something. Because I want to push back on that social media stuff, right? That's real life.
I love that. So you mentioned there's like those profitability areas where you get to where you know that you can start to grow the business or do something. Is there one or two things that you know that you could do that will significantly increase the revenue in the business, or that you can rely on or have relied on in the past if you're ever in a tough spot or need to generate income? Like, is there some little hacks that you have established?
Well, there's a guitar player called Tommy Emmanuel who gave me a really good quote, and he said, "The shortcuts are at the butcher's shop." So I think we all look for that hack. You know, that's why the diet industry is worth so much money, because like literally we all have the answer. Like, consume less calories than you burn, and unless there's something genetically quite wrong with you, that solves it for 98% of the population. So there is no magic kind of thing. But there are, like for us, for example, we see some new verticals that we can get into. We're quite interested in acquiring businesses where we can add some complementary value. And we look at our strengths, and we would look for businesses that are established but don't have those same strengths, so we could put them on top straight away and, you know, drive that efficiency straight away. But there's two sides to it. There's revenue, there's the sales, and then there's actually the cost of business, right? So people often think, well, you know, we're not doing that well, we need to go out and get the sales. But you can actually get that from within your business as well if you analyse the workflows and the systems and invest in automation and those sorts of things. And automation is something that we've worked really hard on from basically the beginning, to be able to scale. And we've gone through periods of time where, you know, we've had 86% growth year on year, 76% year on year. When we were on the Fast 100, I think we averaged 44% for 4 consecutive years. And I think we had one really bad, like single digit year in there. For us, that was bad. It was devastating, you know, like we only grew 8% or something. It just comes down to, of course, sales, getting work in the door, but then also being as efficient as you can with that. And for sales, like we like to just deliver value. And that's why I do so much education. I'm just trying to give as much as I can and just be a person out there in the industry that's advocating for the consumer. I always come back to the consumer, whether I'm thinking about issues that come up on the Pippa board, or whether I'm thinking about a podcast that I want to do for someone. I think, well, where are the consumers' sort of stuck points? And I think that kind of leads you to do activities in a space which are going to lead to sales anyway.
Yeah, that's right. You're being seen and providing value back.
I wish I had a lovely little answer to go, all you got to do is log into Instagram and type this post and chat GPT it, and then you get like 100 grand.
Yeah. You mentioned acquiring businesses there. Is that something you guys have done before?
Yeah, well, not as yet. It's something that we're concurrently looking at. We missed out on one a little while ago, and that still keeps us up nights. But yeah, that's a space that we want to get into, especially in the quantity surveying world. I mean, there's a lot of crusty old chaps with the elbow pads. You know, it's quite an old industry. So there's opportunities to acquire businesses that have just got some really old relationships, or maybe they don't do any tax work, or they don't do any insurance work. We've got quite a spread of services now, so we can plug that into things fairly well. And there's certain there's certain businesses that don't have things that we have. Like we have a fairly good media presence. We have good automation back of house. We do lots of media. We do lots of research and all sorts of things where we're just kind of thinking, well, how can we take our skill set and plug that into other businesses?
So it would be kind of like a roll-up situation. You'd acquire these companies and roll them up into yours. And
well, that depends on the business. I mean, we might continue to operate them under their brand if that brand has a certain value. Like I don't have an ego about it having to be like
MCG.
my name or MCG or anything like that. Yeah.
Okay. You talked about like processes and systems a lot. Is that like, do you get to a certain point with like a particular system or process where you go, this needs to improve or change? Or have you hit those certain profitability margins and gone, okay, now let's reinvest X amount of dollars back into systems and processes? Or is it just a constant ongoing staff members we need to innovate and improve every year?
Yeah, well, it's all three, really. It's like, well, if let's say we have a new service or a new process, we want to analyze it from start to finish, not just the inputs, but also the customer experience as well. And that's a project that I like to do, every year or two, is to say, okay, well, if you come on board with us, what's the first thing that we say? And we're quite big on the first thing we're saying if you've bought an investment property is congratulations. So it's so easy to see it as a transaction. It's like, one of 1,000 we're going to do this month or whatever. It's a big deal for that particular person. It might be the thing that they're most proud of in their life, or it might be the hardest decision they've ever had to make, or it might be the one financial decision that they make that changes their future more than any other one. So they deserve to be congratulated for taking that step,
That makes sense. Obviously, as the business has grown, the hierarchy or your hierarchy has grown as well.
Yeah.
How have you felt like your role has significantly changed over time?
Yeah, it definitely has. I mean, I'm not really on the tools. I don't do reports anymore. I make sure that I can. I keep my tech knowledge good. But, I mean, as distinct from maybe some competitors, like that's my background. Like I wasn't hired as a CEO or anything. I was just a tech guy that started a business really because he just wanted to do reports and be left alone. And now, like, I never get left alone and I can't do any reports. So I guess it went really wrong from what I originally hoped to get out of it. But we have a middle management tier now. So what we sort of did in the past is like, oh, you're really good at that. You should be in charge of the other people that do that. And they're like, oh, yeah, cool. But those two things they don't always match. You might be really good at a particular thing, but managing other people to do that thing, you might not understand why they aren't as good as you. You might not have good communication skills. You might not be consistent. So management skills are very, very different. So we had a few people that we've hired just because they were good. A few of those people we've sort of said, okay, I think we need to go back and focus on what you're actually good at, because they kind of realise that they're a bit out of their depth and they get sort of anxious and worried about, I'm supposed to deliver this and this is not really what I signed up for. So then we've recently hired quite a bit of external talent rather than sort of working your way up from the mailroom, as it were, to a position, getting senior people in to go, okay, this is what we need. We can see from your resume and everything that you've done before, you know how to do this, so let's jump in and do it. Yeah. So my role now is we call them the function heads. That's our sort of management tier. So, of course, I used to have maybe like 17 people reporting to me directly. And then now it's really just, normally it would be like my EA, it would be my only one pure report to me. We're sort of sharing EAs these days, and it's the function heads. So those are the only ones that we really have reporting directly to us, and then they manage the rest of the team.
They do the rest of everything else. That's smart.
Yeah.
I haven't really seen like an MCG advertisement or anything else like that. But I know you do a lot of media and a lot of content and podcasting and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Has that kind of been from your side of the business, I'd say?
Yeah.
And maybe even if you know Marty's, touch on Marty's, but like how has your whole sort of marketing and sales element, what does that look like?
Well, from the beginning, I started writing for Property Observer. Now that got bought a few years ago by Urban, I think. But it was a fairly prestigious publication back in the day. And I basically sort of said, look, I'm interested in being a contributor, and I put quite a lot of effort into the work that I was doing for them, and went to their Christmas party, and they said, oh, one of your articles got the most downloads we've ever had. And that was really good. And then we had a competitor. I don't know this exactly, but it seems very obvious to me that we had a competitor that advertised on that space, and then they stopped receiving my submissions. So I presume that competitor said, like, yeah, we'll take some ad space on there as long as that Mortlock bloke gets the ass. Because how did I go from, getting praise for one of their best performing articles to they're like, oh yeah, we can't accept your stuff anymore. You have to speak to like accounts about it. Well, what do you mean accounts? Like, I give you free stories, you put them on the internet. So that kind of made me realise, gee, we've got some. Like, we were still very, very small then, and we had companies that had marketing budgets bigger than our hope of top-line revenue, right? So it's like, how are we going to do this? And yeah, I guess that's where we've kind of focused in the marketing is providing that content and the analysis. And one thing that we did from the beginning that sort of was like the genius of a lot of the stuff that I do now is that when we started the business, our competitors were saying, we get between $5,000 and $10,000 worth of deductions on average, and my sort of thoughts was, well, that's not an average. Let's tidy that up. That's a range, and what is the average? Like, give us the figure. And I still remember we were the first to say it was $9,183, and I did it to 2 decimal places just to show that I was paying attention, and it was real data. Because there's so much garbage out there. People will say, even in my industry, up to 80% of the purchase price you can get in deductions. Well, I've done reports where the deductions are higher than the purchase price. That makes accountants very nervous. That's a side story, though. So I hated all that stuff. So now, really from the beginning, we collected as much data as we could, and that data expanded to the point where, now we have competitors probably doing more volume that are using that model to tell their own stories. But I actually think that's a good thing, because we just get more of a story, because there's certain data that we have that no one else has, like CoreLogic don't have it, REA, when did you buy the property? A lot of people have that. But when did you move out of the property and turn it into a rental? Now, the ATO probably has records, but they don't publish stuff like that. So we were able to say that on average, the amount of time that people live in a property was 4 years, and track how that changes over time. Now to the point where we're like, okay, are people buying houses versus units? How far do they live from where their investment property is, and how does that change? What was it like pre-pandemic? What was it like post? How much are people spending on renovations? Or, there's a million different data points, and we just use that to tell what we think is interesting stories into investor behavior. And that's the stuff that I like to do, and that's probably where our marketing sits in that kind of marketing ecosystem. Yes, we do some Google ads, we've done Facebook campaigns, we advertised in a property magazine, and then there was a particular issue that came out that property magazine was building a portfolio or something, and one of the series was, and now we've got this quantity surveyor, and you'd be mad to use anyone else, and it wasn't us. And then the next page, it's like MCG Quantity Surveyors. Needless to say, that was the last month we ever advertised in a property magazine.
Yeah, that's pretty rough.
It was rough.
Yeah, your data's really good. Like, you're always bringing out new statistics or new information. Is that data that you've just collected from doing all of the, working in the space over the time?
Or they're our clients, essentially. Yeah. So we don't share names or, any specifics. But when you've got broad samples of tens of thousands of depreciation schedules, and you can see, okay, well, where was it? What was it? How old was it? What were the total deductions? What was the first year deductions? These data points, they're just building all day, every day, to the point where, compared to myself, Marty hasn't been as out front as myself traditionally. In the last couple of years, that's changed, but he does that much more in the insurance space. So we started collecting that data in insurance replacement costs and found that 24%, the average property owner is underinsured by 24%. And that was data that I've never seen in the world before.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in Australia, maybe in the world it exists, but
still,
I like that.
It's good stuff. It's not stuff that people often talk about or think about or have the data on, so it's good to have. So you said that, with the hierarchy, there's kind of only got one direct report, and now you even share that one direct report.
Yeah.
Outside of that, have you hired the middle management to kind of take over leadership with the people and HR and
Pretty
everything
much
else like that? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want really anything to do with people, to be honest. Like I don't see myself as an inspiring person. I just like to go into my little corner in my little world and do my stuff. And that's really part of the reason why I wanted to start the business, because I was like, I just want to do the reports and be left alone. I don't want to deal with all the other stuff. And that worked for a little bit, and then it stopped working completely. I suppose my personality has changed to some degree. Like, people argue with me and they say, like, you're not an introvert. I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure I would know, like of anyone, because they see me doing stuff like this and maybe it appears natural. I've done lots of stuff and, I try and be funny and, but in my heart of hearts, like, that steals from the other part of me that needs quiet space. So I actually have to, it's kind of like a scuba diving term, but I use it as they say off-gassing, right? Because you build the nitrogen bubbles in your blood, so you need some surface time. Well, I need to off-gas. I need to be in my own space. That's why I've always really liked endurance sports, like, doing long runs or bike. People have run groups or bike groups. Always really just done it myself, because that was my time to just think about stuff and process and be left alone.
Yeah, you get that hour or two to yourself. Yeah. I'm the same. Like, everyone looks at me and says I'm the biggest extrovert that they'll ever meet. But if I don't have 2 or 3 hours a day just to myself, whether that be at the gym or going for a walk or, just at night, I go crazy. Like, I can't be with people 24/7.
Yeah.
And I've had to learn to enjoy doing this, which I do genuinely enjoy.
Yeah.
But, at the end I'm exhausted and you need time to relax.
Yeah. So I think there are more gregarious, inspirational leaders within our business that I would much rather want to work for and report to. And I just sort of try and be that kind of that mad scientist style person. I come out and say, like, this is what we're doing and we're integrating over here and we're building this and we're doing that, and you're all doing a great job and I'll see you later. I'm going to do something else,
And so within that sort of leadership role, and I forgot what you've coined it, but like the
function heads,
those ones. Is there certain key metrics that you guys monitor on like a monthly, quarterly basis?
Well, we have a strategic plan per department, and then we have there's normally sort of 3 key metrics. So that might be, let's say it's turnaround time. It might be the volume of work in a particular day, and we report on errors and we want them to be under a certain percentage. So we have I think 8 televisions all around the office, and they have dedicated ones to each department, which puts those metrics up there in real time. And it works on a traffic light system, so it's red, that it goes to amber, and then it's green. So at the end of the day, we want to kind of see green. And it enables the managers and myself and Marty to just walk out to the floor, do a whip around and go, I think I need to go and see what's happening over there. It's so powerful, right?
I love that.
And I just think, like, whatever doesn't get measured doesn't get managed, and I'm all about managing and split testing as well, just trying to split test everything and say, well, okay, well, let's do it 100 times this way, 100 times that way, and it just works out at a meritocracy. It's like that one won, and it's like, well, why did that win? Well, we made the mistake of changing 2 variables. You should have done 1. Let's go back to one of them and get that one right and see what happens.
But also it's exposure for everyone. Like, when things are good, things are great and everyone can see it. When things might not be going as well, like it's evident. And so there's never like this hidden element to it. It's like, okay, there's an issue. It's not anyone specifically their specific problem, but we're all aware of it. We can address it. We can visually see it and go fix it from there.
Yeah. And what we really want is to be able to have everyone in any position go, I had a good day. And like, well, what does that mean? Like, well, look at my board. Like, I hit all those things. They can come in and they go, these are the key things that I need to do. And I can leave the day knowing that it was great. I mean, we had particular months where Marty would say to some of our estimators, like, how was the month? I was like, oh, that was brutal. Like, like I was flat out. I didn't feel like I did anything. And, the revenue was massive. Other times, like, oh, it's cruisy, and that was all right. But then they actually did more, So it doesn't always kind of work on the seat of the pants sort of thing. Like, you can have months that feel really good that don't really perform. You can have other ones that you feel like you're chasing your tail, but they were great.
Yeah, it's interesting about business. Hey, it's up and down. So obviously when you were starting the business, you guys were hustling really hard, building the business, building the revenue, ensuring every month that there was going to be money coming in the door.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people, once they get to a particular level, especially if you've got like a mid-management with hierarchy, leadership, HR, everything kind of sorted, either go in two directions. They either do exactly as you say, like stick to just me doing the reports and like I just want to put my head down and do that, or they move to this more sort of lifestyle, balance, family time, working out, all that sort of stuff. Has your personal time changed a lot as you've grown the business?
Yeah, well, I suppose like in the beginning, I worked from my home office. And so if I woke up at 5 a.m. on a Sunday, I'd just go, I may as well go in and tidy up the emails. Or if I felt like I didn't have anything to do, I was like, I'll go and put a couple of hours in because I'll see some benefit from that. I think it was really important getting an office and removing that. And then, you know, my off-gassing time would be the drive from the office to home so I could try and be present. But that's a difficult thing, like being present when your phone buzzes and there's emergency things that pop up. But right now, I guess we're at the point where we are still kind of bedding in our middle management team. There's a few new starters happening Monday. Actually, I won't even be in the office, but it's good that there are other people that can kind of onboard them and help them. But we just kind of want to empower them to say, like, we'll stop looking to us, because that's what often used to happen in the management meetings. Is like, all right, well, what do you guys want to do? Like, well, don't ask us what we want to do. Like, we'll tell you strategically where we're trying to get to, but you know what needs to be done, right? These are your departments. You run them. You know, if you feel like you need to change a procedure and there's a meritocratic kind of analysis that says it should be done this way for these reasons, then don't let us get in the way. You know, we don't make us bottlenecks, and that's something that we're going to spend a bit of time on that, and then that'll take us away from some of the day-to-day operation stuff, so we can look at the marketplace, we can look at acquisitions, we can look at different services that we want to get into. And I've also got two little people, you know, so I don't want to look back and regret it. I'm really kind of thinking about, like, I want to just be like a memory factory, you know, like creating memories. And they don't always have to be overseas holidays or wonderful things, but it's just, you know, like I went and got some arts and crafts stuff the other day and had like an arts afternoon with the children, you know, that sort of stuff. Like, that's really important, because you hear about people on their deathbed. No one ever says, like, if I had my time again, I would have spent less time with my kids. I've never heard that before. That would be weird. Probably rotten children, right? But it just doesn't happen. So, you know, life can pass you by pretty quick. I remember thinking I was young, and now I feel like, geez, most people I catch up with now are younger than me, you know, especially in prop tech or, you know, even buyer's agents. There's a few stalwarts that probably think I'm the young upstart. But, you know, life gets away from you pretty quick, and unless you're a reincarnationist, you only get one go at it. And even if you are, you know, a God fancier, then and you think, well, the real business is when you get upstairs. But but what are you doing here? You know, like you got to do something with it, right? And I don't believe in afterlife or any of that sort of stuff. So I'm like, here you get one go. And already I'm annoyed of wasting my time on things that I thought were important, and you get sucked into stuff. That's why I like aviation so much. You go above something and you go, oh, everything that I thought was really important is on this little pinprick on the ground there. Or that particular thing that I was really worried about, like cosmically, that's just nothing. You know, we're pale blue dots floating in space.
That's a good analogy. It's a good way to think about it. A lot of people say, like, zoom out on Google Maps and then, like, zoom all the way out and you'll see it's just one little blue ball, and it's like every single problem that you've ever had is so small in comparison to everything else that's out there.
Yeah.
And it's right. No one on their deathbed will say, I wish I worked harder.
Yeah.
So has there throughout that process, has there been something like, I know you're not like much of a daily habit ice bath type of guy, but is there something that you do on a daily basis or a regular basis that helps or has helped you grow the business or something like that?
That's a good question. I think I've tried to get efficiency out of every single day. Like I'm big on sort of the 90-day plans, and, you know, maybe having 3 things that I desperately want to get done that particular day. I'm not a water cooler person. I just kind of think if you're stuffing around at work, you're stealing from your family at home. Like, just batch it, get it done, and leave early. Like rather than stretch it out just to get to 5 or whenever knock-off time is. So, there's not some sort of checklist that I follow. I mean, the 90-day plans and having like 3 things that I want to deliver, like that sort of keeps me grounded. But it's, just trying to eliminate just the fluff. And, one of the first things I did was, have an EA that just took care of the inbox, because the inbox is just this swirling dark matterous void that just sucks time and will to live. There's so much stuff that just goes on in there that you get sucked into and is garbage, except your newsletter. That's lovely. I just realised that I'm sort of setting fire to the relationship maybe here. But, just trying to focus on, well, where do I add the most value? So, for example, I did a presentation to a commercial property group and, won a couple of jobs out of that. And I don't know what that would be worth, $5,000 maybe for an hour's work. Now, I don't pay myself $5,000 an hour. And most people in the business probably can't do an hour's work and generate $5,000 worth of sales, but I can, So that's where I always kind of go back to, well, where am I adding the most value to the business? Yeah. You also got to work on the things that you enjoy and that give you joy to do, but if you can line those two together, then that's really powerful.
Is there anything you would go back and change about your business or the things that you've done?
Well, I probably would have started years earlier, and everyone's a billionaire in hindsight, right? So I should have borrowed money and not worried about my $7,000, tipped it all in, because I know I have the benefit now to know that it worked and that we were successful, right? At least to what our expectations were. And we kept setting goals and we kept hitting them to the point where I actually had to force myself to stop. So I bought like a secondhand sports car. It's like a midlife crisis thing. It wasn't particularly fancy, and social media is full of these baller cars. But to me, it was a big deal. I thought if I was like a 7-year-old kid in Yarong Creek, which is a town I grew up in that no one's ever heard of, and I saw that car driving past, I would think that's a celebrity. In my head, it would have been Daryl Summers, because he was the most famous person on TV, right? That's showing my age, right? So, Hey, It's Saturday died, 20 years ago or something. But I just thought, like, rich people must be on telly. There must be famous people. It was actually quite a culture shock when I started, looking at these places in Sydney for $8 or $10 million. I'm like, who am I going to meet? And it's like nobody, just a random bloke, just a Chinese fella, or just a white guy who works in finance. Like they were nobodies. And it made me realize there's so much wealth out there. It's not like celebrities. Like wealth it's out there, and people generate wealth doing all sorts of different things, and it's not always their job. I mean, I think one thing that I feel like a very small part of, and you a bigger part, is educating people on property and what you can do, so you can be a teacher or a nurse and amass quite a stack, not because of a high-powered job, but just being disciplined with your money and making the right decisions.
I like that. What's next for Mike Mortlock?
Well, we'll have dinner, I reckon. After that, I don't know. Like I'm still enjoying what I'm doing. And I think I'd probably get bored if I chucked it away. Personally, I really enjoy mentoring other people in business that have sort of gone through some of the pain and some of the different stages that we've had. I'd love to write a book or a course or something on that. More of a passion project, doesn't really kind of align with the business. But, I'm pretty excited about getting our middle management tier just firing and empowered to do the job and just get out of their way, because many of them are far more capable than I am, and just working on the strategy, doing the media, being sort of the face of the business. I've come to enjoy that, and I've met a lot of great people and friends through it. Like I think we met because you came across me on a podcast. Was that the first time we?
Yeah, I think someone introduced us, and then you invited me on your podcast.
Yeah,
this would have been like 5-6 years ago.
Yeah. And I went on your avocado show as well. That was good. That's probably one of the most fun podcasts I did, because I think I just was in a silly mood and I just had fun. I was just mucking around.
Yeah, it was fun.
It was good.
Not like the Kent Lardner days though. They were a bit fun.
That was a bit silly. Yeah. We had to. I pulled that down off the internet, but apparently people have told me that it still exists, and people ask me about that all the time. But, the last episode was titled Amber Heard Poos in Bed. So where do you go from there? It just got out of control.
Actually, every episode was getting significally worse.
Yeah.
Because not bad, but just more dangerous.
Yeah, the bar just kept going up and up and up to the point where, my mate who became Darren from Logan who would ring in and say, my missus is on OnlyFans and all this weird edgy stuff that we're kind of like, I don't think I've made enough money to be cancelled yet. So maybe I'll bring that back later when I don't care and I can get cancelled. I mean, none of that was designed to marginalise anyone or make fun of anyone, but it's a different world we live in today. You can tread on toes without knowing it, and I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, kind of get away with some stuff.
Yeah.
Well, what advice would you give for people that are maybe starting their business or nice and early in their business journey or might be facing some problems? If it's something that you enjoy doing, is there any piece of advice you would give?
Well, I think you've sort of got to understand your own drivers and your motivations. Like who we are as human beings is quite important. And I think about the Buddhist philosophy of the uncarved block, every experience that we have takes a little bit of a chunk out of us. And sometimes those experiences can be from childhood to say I'm not really good or I'm never going to amount to anything. And that can really impact the trajectory of who you are and what you do in life. So it's probably a weird business tip, but I would just make sure that you're ready to go. You've done that work, you've spoken to a psychologist, you've done that peering in the mirror and going, okay, well, this is maybe a limiting belief, or this is an area where I might need to seek some guidance from someone because I don't feel confident in it. And then, I had a guy say to me, he had some advice. This is an old chap. When he was starting out, the advice was bite off more than you can chew and then chew like mad. And I think that's really what I feel like we did. I mean, we didn't bite off more than we can chew in a financial sense. I mean, that $7,000 was risky, right? But we just kind of thought, you know what, let's just have a crack. Let's just have a go. Let's swing for the fence and not die wondering what would happen. And I used to always have this thing where my wife would say to me, how was the month? Because you were really worried. And I was like, was I? And I'm like, oh yeah, I would have been, because that's where, and I just that happens so many times. And I just, you can zoom in too much on what you think is going on. Obviously, if you have a problem in business, you need to rectify it. You need to analyze kind of what's going wrong. But you can worry too much about was that a bad day or was that a bad month? It's about putting all that stuff together.
Yeah, it's funny how you can have such a bad week sometimes, and then you zoom out and you go, well, it was just 2 really bad days, but the rest of the month is caught up and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
So true. Well, thanks for coming on, my friend.
It's a pleasure.
It's lots of detail, lots of good analysis, lots of good takeaways. So keen to break it down.
I hope there's something in it for somebody that's listening. If you can reach one person.
That's the main thing.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure. Cheers.